Samara Johnson stepped through the revolving doors of the Chicago Fire Department's licensing office just before 9 in the morning, her black leather satchel swinging at her side and a crisp folder of documents pressed against her forearm. Outside, autumn's chill lingered in the air, but inside the lobby's fluorescent glow, she felt the warmth of confidence. After 2 years of emergency room night shifts, advanced cardiac life support certification, and perfect scores on her paramedic theory exams, she was certain today she would finally add certified EMT to her credentials. She approached the reception desk, where a harried clerk in a fire department polo glanced up from a stack of binders. "Name?" he grunted. "Samara Johnson," she replied, offering her driver's license and college transcript. The clerk's eyes flicked to the polished letters on her University of Illinois diploma, then back to the form she'd filled out down to the last decimal point. "Application's incomplete," he said, rifling through her folder. He tapped a page, missing the community service verification sheet from Mercy Hospital. Samara's heart sank. "I submitted the letter from HR confirming my 500 volunteer hours," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Here, it's on official letterhead." He flipped the page to reveal a neat block of text stamped and signed by Mercy's volunteer coordinator. The clerk frowned, then set the letter aside. "It's not the form we require. You need Form FD213A, not the hospital's internal memo." Samara took a breath. The FD213A is identical information: hours, dates, signature. Mercy Hospital doesn't use that numbering system. He shook his head. "Policy is policy. Come back when you have the right form." Swallowing the surge of frustration, Samara produced another document. Her practical exam results, signed off by 2 senior paramedics. "I passed the hands-on skills test last month," she said. "Written score was 98%. I've already covered the protocols." The clerk tapped his pen against his desk. "You'll need to schedule the retest. Application remains on hold." Samara's cheeks flushed. "There's no retest. I've already completed both parts. I've been riding along on rigs with certified EMTs every Friday night for half a year. Mercy's night shift director can vouch for my competence." Behind her, other applicants, mostly recent high school graduates in neon-trimmed jackets, stepped forward, their red and white EMT candidate badges gleaming in the foyer lights. The clerk waved them through, offering nods and quick congratulations as he scanned their clean paperwork. When the last of them passed, Samara looked back at her own file spread on the counter. Diplomas, letters of recommendation from ER physicians, clinical rotation evaluations, every conceivable proof of her skills and character. Yet here she stood, stalled by a single form that no one else seemed to need. She cleared her throat. "Is this standard?" she asked, voice firm. "Or is there something else I should know?" The clerk's gaze flicked to the door, then down at her ID badge. "Samara Johnson, RN." And he sighed. "Look, you're a nurse," he said finally, tone softer but resolute. "This EMT certification is for pre-hospital responders. You'll need to follow the same process as everyone else: school, internship, paperwork." Samara steadied herself, recalling the countless times she'd rushed onto ambulances and coordinated triage in the back of speeding rigs, every second a matter of life and death. She opened her mouth to protest that nurses were the backbone of emergency care, that her ALS certification authorized her to perform every skill the EMT badge allowed. But the clerk's indifferent shrug told her there was no argument to be had here. Clutching her folder to her chest, Samara nodded once and turned away, the door's chime echoing behind her. As she stepped back into the raw morning air, the weight of the incomplete application slip burned in her pocket like a challenge. A bureaucratic barrier she knew she could, and would, overcome. That night, long after the licensing office had closed its doors and the city's 24-hour diners flickered their neon signs, Samara Johnson clocked back into Mercy Hospital's emergency department. The ward was thick with the low hum of monitors and the soft shuffle of night shift nurses making their rounds. She exchanged a weary but determined nod with her charge nurse, a veteran named Rosa Martinez, then stepped into the fluorescent glow of the overflow hallway, where stretchers lined the walls like silent witnesses to the city's sleepless crises. At 11:15 p.m., an incoming trauma alert crackled over the PA. Code C, possible cardiac arrest, room 6. Samara dashed through the double doors, stethoscope bounding against her chest. There, under the harsh glare of the overhead lamp, lay Mr. Wallace, a 76-year-old man whose ECG flatlined seconds before she arrived. Without hesitation, Samara knelt beside him, each practiced movement a testament to her paramedic training. She pressed the pads of the defibrillator to his damp chest, counted aloud, and delivered a 200-joule shock that sent a jolt through the room. When the monitor sprang back to life in a rhythm of beeps, Samara leaned in, her gloved fingers checking pulses as she barked orders to an oncoming certified EMT. "Let's get her on the airway," she said, though medical protocol dictated that only certified EMTs, or higher, could manage advanced airways. Undeterred, she assembled the laryngoscope and endotracheal tube, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had performed this procedure dozens of times. The EMT hesitated, but Samara's calm urgency left no room for debate. Within moments, Mr. Wallace's oxygen saturation climbed, and colour returned to his ashen skin. By midnight, the hospital's ambulance bay had become a staging ground of urgency. 7 patients had arrived within the hour. Stroke victims, crash injuries, acute asthmatics, all overwhelming the department's small cohort of certified EMTs. Samara, her scrubs stained with sweat and sanitizing gel, floated between cases. Drawing blood for critical labs, setting up IV drips of tissue plasminogen activator for a suspected stroke, and guiding terrified families through bedside CPR. Instructions until paramedics could arrive. In a brief lull, she paused outside the break room, pressing her palm against the cool metal of the door. Through the narrow window, she saw her colleagues slumped over coffee mugs, eyes heavy. She offered a tired smile, but did not stop. Instead, Samara returned to room 12, where an asthma patient gasped under a failing nebulizer. With deft fingers, she rigged an improvised ventilation circuit, one she had studied in EMT school, hooking an ambu bag to the mask and squeezing the bag in precise 2-second intervals. The patient's chest rose and fell with renewed strength, and Samara watched until the colour returned to the child's lips. At 2:45 a.m., Samara finally allowed herself a brief respite. She retreated to a supply closet, closed the door behind her, and inhaled deeply. Pulling out her phone, she checked the time. 6 hours until the next licensing appeal window opened. On the screen, a message pinged from Rosa. "You're needed back in Bay 3, possible STEMI." Samara pocketed her phone, refastened her stethoscope, and squared her shoulders. As she emerged into the corridor's fluorescent glare, she carried not only her trauma kit, but an unshakable conviction. Credentials on paper did not define her ability to save lives. Her skills and heart did. And although she had been denied that EMT badge that morning, by dawn she would prove that titles could not limit the depth of her compassion or the extent of her service. Before the sun had fully risen, Samara Johnson's phone vibrated with an urgent text alert from the hospital's incident command, 6-alarm fire, North Lawndale high-rise. "Need all available responders?" She bolted upright in her on-call room, flicking off the kettle she'd left boiling. In seconds, she was back in her scrubs, lacing up her steel toe clogs and grabbing the trauma pack she kept by her bedside. Outside, Chicago's dawn was grey and rain-thickened, droplets beating on her windshield as she weaved past stalled breakfast traffic toward West 16th Street. Through the rolling mist, she could already see plumes of black smoke curling above the apartment towers. Sirens clamoured in the distance, but the fire engines and ambulances were queued behind one another, stalled by congested streets. Without hesitation, Samara turned into a nearby alley, navigating between dumpsters and chain-link fences to reach the rear of the building. She jumped out, chest heaving, and strapped on her portable oxygen tank and mask. Her EMT grade kit she carried, despite lacking the formal badge. Flames licked the third-floor windows, and the roar of collapsing drywall echoed through the concrete courtyard. A young mother and her 2 children stood huddled at the base of a charred fire escape, coughing, their faces streaked with soot. "Over here!" Samara shouted, raising her voice above the roar. She loosened her mask to speak clearly. "Grab my hand, one at a time. We'll get you down." She guided the trembling children onto the bottom step, her gloved hands steady on their tiny arms, then helped the mother descend as embers fluttered overhead. Spotting an elderly man slumped halfway up a ladder on the 6th floor, Samara scanned for an alternate route. A coiled extension ladder lay against the ground beneath a window 2 stories above the first landing. Without waiting, she sprinted to it, hauling the ladder upright. With knees bent and arms straining, she hoisted it into place under the window's sill. The rungs rattled as she climbed swiftly to the window's height, then hoisted herself through the opening into a smoky hallway. Inside, the heat was oppressive. Samara tapped the elderly man's shoulder, his breath shallow, eyes half closed. "I'm here to help. Can you move?" she asked, voice firm. He tried to nod, but coughed harshly. She slipped an arm under his shoulders, another beneath his knees, and hefted his weight against her chest, descending rung by rung as carefully as the first. By the time she reached the bottom, her scrubs were streaked with ash and her gloves were sticky with soot. Neighbours who'd gathered below formed a human chain, clutching the man as Samara lowered him to the pavement. She pressed an oxygen mask to his face and checked his pulse, steady but weak. "You're safe now," she murmured, glancing up at the blaze still raging above. Nearby, her phone buzzed with incoming notifications, videos of her rescue circulating on social media. Samara spared no thought for recognition. A sudden tremor shook the fire escape overhead, sending a shower of sparks onto the wet concrete. Without a thought, she grabbed the toddler who'd clung to her side and sprinted to the rear alley, where makeshift triage tents had been erected by volunteer medics. As recoiling tenants scrambled down alternate stairwells, Samara coordinated with arriving paramedics, directing them to victims still trapped on upper floors, relaying precise locations, and ensuring each patient received oxygen and warmth. Over the PA, the fire chief called for additional backup. Samara intercepted, identifying herself as a registered nurse with advanced life support training. "I can lead interior rescue efforts if needed," she offered. The chief's voice crackled back. "Proceed with caution, Nurse Johnson. Teammates en route." Wet embers danced in the dawn light as engines roared and hoses unreeled. Samara paused for a moment, breathing deeply through her mask, watching as neighbours she'd helped waved in gratitude. She knew her credentials still read incomplete application, but in that moment, armed with only her skills and resolve, she had become exactly the first responder her community needed. By mid-morning, the videos began to surface. Shaky smartphone, footage of Samara, oxygen mask strapped to her face, sprinting down the soaked alley carrying a terrified toddler clutched to her chest. She emerges from the smoke-hung stairwell, her scrubs darkened with soot, and hands the child into waiting arms before disappearing back into the inferno for the elderly man. On Twitter, the first clip, filmed by a neighbour leaning against the bricked courtyard wall, was shared under the caption, "Nurse or EMT, doesn't matter. She's a hero." Within minutes, it had been retweeted thousands of times with Giacomo's Nurse Hero and Badge Not brand. Facebook posts from community groups exploded with gratitude. That's our Samara. And when bureaucracy fails, compassion prevails. By midday, local news vans circled the block. Reporters huddled beneath yellow police tape, iPads balanced on shoulders, replaying the footage as anchors gasped on live feeds. One broadcast dubbed her the Angel of Lawndale, capturing Samara's calm command over chaos. On Instagram, the hashtag #JoshRescueByDawn trended nationally, accompanied by side-by-side frames showing before, families stranded on burning balconies, and after, Samara leading them to safety. Even the Chicago Fire Department's official Twitter account joined the chorus, Chicago FD or Chicago Fire Dept. We've seen many brave first responders, but tonight, Nurse Samara Johnson redefined heroism. "Thank you for your service, badge or no badge." Comments from politicians followed. The mayor's account tweeted, "Chicago owes a debt of gratitude to Samara Johnson. We will review EMT certification procedures immediately." On the City Council floor, aldermen cited the viral videos as evidence that licensing delays endangered lives, demanding an emergency review of credentialing processes. Meanwhile, Samara herself was still on the scene, organising blankets and hot drinks for displaced families at a makeshift shelter set up in a nearby school gymnasium. She smiled tiredly as neighbors recognized her, offering hugs and handshakes. A local teenager handed her a phone playing a montage of the rescue set to swelling music and text overlays. When titles fail, hearts prevail. As the sun climbed higher, the footage crossed into national news. Morning shows in New York and Los Angeles featured the burning building clips, and cable news panels praised the nurse who saved us all. Medical journals and hospital blogs ran headlines like "Redefining the First Responder Nurse Samara's Unofficial EMT Role." By the time Samara finally returned home, scrubs exchanged for dry clothes and a cup of strong tea, her phone's notifications numbered in the thousands. Messages of support flooded in. From estranged classmates now extolling her courage, from community organizers offering assistance, and from complete strangers pledging donations to a fund for her expedited EMT certification. In the warm quiet of her apartment, Samara scrolled through the outpouring of gratitude and calls for reform. She understood that her actions had ignited more than a viral sensation. They had sparked a citywide reckoning on the barriers that kept capable hands from saving lives. And as the sun set on that day of hashtags and headlines, she resolved to ensure that by dawn's next light, no nurse willing to run into danger would ever again be turned away at the door. By mid-afternoon, City Hall's phone lines were flooded with calls and emails demanding action. Not just praise, but real change. At 3 p.m., Mayor Lopez summoned Samara Johnson to the council chambers, a high-ceilinged room hung with portraits of past civic leaders and flanked by the flags of Chicago's 50 wards. Reporters and cameramen jostled for position behind the polished oak dais as aldermen took their seats. When Samara entered in her hospital scrubs, the chamber fell silent. Mayor Lopez, seated at the center, rose and extended a hand. "Nurse Johnson," he began, voice resonant, "you saved lives today in a way that defies our bureaucratic rules. Chicago owes you, and every qualified caregiver, the ability to act when duty calls." He turned to the city's fire commissioner, who nodded gravely and presented Samara with an embossed executive order. Reading from the document, the commissioner declared, "Effective immediately, all registered nurses with advanced cardiac life support certification are granted temporary EMT status under the Emergency Response Act for the duration of this declared public safety crisis." Aldermen burst into applause. Samara's eyes brimmed as the order was signed and handed to her. Cameras flashed as she held the signed document aloft, proof that her city had recognized compassion and competence over paperwork. Within the hour, the Chicago Fire Department's public website updated with a new portal. Qualified nurses. Apply for temporary EMT credentials. The page outlined a streamlined process. No additional forms, no extra fees, granting nurses like Samara full legal authority to perform EMT duties on the front lines. The portal's launch was announced via an emergency alert to every hospital and clinic network in the city. Meanwhile, the hospital where Samara worked received a surprise delivery. Boxes of new EMT badges stamped with her name and credentials. Her colleagues gathered in the break room as the head of nursing administration pinned the badge to her scrub pocket, the stainless steel crest gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "You earned this," Rosa Martinez whispered, hugging her. By evening, local media reported on the policy shift. A council resolution was drafted that same day to permanently review and reform EMT licensing requirements, ensuring that nurses with appropriate training would no longer be sidelined. Community organizations pledged to monitor the implementation and support other nurse heroes. As Samara drove home that night, her new EMT badge resting against the dashboard, she passed the charred shell of the North Lawndale apartment block now, secured behind yellow tape. In the window of the makeshift command trailer, someone had taped a poster bearing her photo and the words, "Chicago's Real First Responder." Streetlights reflected off the poster's plastic lamination, as if to spotlight her achievement for every passerby. Inside her apartment, Samara placed the signed executive order and her new badge on her dresser, symbols of a city's promise kept. And as she lay down to rest, the quiet hum of sirens in the distance no longer grated on her nerves, but reminded her that when rules bend to humanity, the capacity to save lives is limited only by one's courage and heart. Sprosit ChatGPT. In the days following the mayor's executive order, Samara Johnson's role as both nurse and emergency responder deepened into a citywide movement for reform. On Monday morning, she reported to the Chicago Fire Department's EMT training division, no longer as an applicant, but as a credentialed practitioner. The training room buzzed with energy. Veteran paramedics, recently sworn-in nurses, and cadets fresh from the academy filled rows of chairs, each eager to learn from the woman whose actions had reshaped policy. Mentorship and certification clinics. Samara took the podium beside Captain Raj Patel, the department's lead training officer. Together, they launched a series of Nurse to EMT accelerated clinics, designed to onboard registered nurses with ACLS certification. Samara led hands-on workshops in advanced airway management, trauma extrication techniques, and mass casualty triage. Her every demonstration informed by that harrowing North Lawndale fire. In one session, she guided paramedic trainees through a simulated building collapse, her calm voice directing, "Patient 2 to the left, vitals stable, prepare for rapid transport." The room felt electric, as nurses who'd long been sidelined stepped confidently into roles they'd earned through skill and dedication. Community First Responder Network. Outside the training facility, Samara partnered with local aldermen and non-profit leaders to establish the Chicago Community First Responder Network. Drawing on her North Lawndale experience, she coordinated volunteer teams in 6 high-risk neighborhoods, each equipped with medical backpacks stocked with oxygen masks, hemostatic dressings, and digital radios linked to dispatch. Samara personally oversaw the deployment to South Shore, West Garfield Park, and Pilsen, areas historically underserved by emergency services. She trained residents in basic life support and incident reporting, forging bonds of trust that would ensure faster, community-driven responses to fires, medical crises, and natural disasters. Curriculum reform at Mercy Hospital School of Nursing. Back at Mercy Hospital, where she still worked occasional night shifts, Samara met with the Director of Nursing Education, Dr. Luis Hernandez. Together, they overhauled the hospital's nursing curriculum to integrate pre-hospital care modules. Classrooms that once taught hospital-only protocols now hosted simulations of 911 dispatch scenarios, stretcher transfers from ambulances, and communication drills with fire and police dispatchers. Samara lectured to cohorts of 50 students at a time, her presence a living testament to what nursing training could achieve when boundaries between in-hospital and pre-hospital care dissolved. Public recognition and awards. That summer, Samara was one of 3 honorees at the Illinois State Medal of Valor ceremony. Before a crowd of first responders and state officials, the governor pinned the Medal of Valor on her scrub top, calling her an exemplar of courage, compassion, and tireless service. Cameras captured her modest smile as she accepted the award, looking out at a sea of faces. Nurses in blue uniforms, EMTs in Star of Life patches, and community volunteers who'd shared her midnight rescues, sustained impact, and policy codification. Under her advocacy, the City Council passed Ordinance 2026-083, permanently allowing any registered nurse with ACLS certification and at least 2 years of emergency room experience to obtain EMT licensure. Through a streamlined process, the ordinance mandated annual review of first responder credentials and created a joint committee of the Fire Department, Nursing Board, and community representatives to monitor ongoing equity in emergency care access. A neighbourhood's new hope. One evening, Samara returned to North Lawndale, now the site of a newly refurbished community centre named the Samara Johnson Wellness and Response Hub. Painted in warm yellows and blues, its facade bore a mural depicting Samara's silhouette holding an oxygen mask and guiding a child to safety. Inside, volunteers staffed a 24/7 hotline, neighbours attended CPR refresher courses, and a small clinic offered free health screenings. Samara cut the red ribbon alongside the local alderman, children cheering and camera flashes popping. She walked through the hub's hallways, her presence no longer a reminder of past barriers, but of a future where every capable caregiver stood ready to save lives. In that moment, surrounded by the community she'd fought to protect and empower, Samara understood that her legacy extended far beyond a single rescue. Through policy, education, and unwavering service, she had ensured that no one in Chicago would ever again be denied the care they deserved. Because compassion and competence, she had proved, know no badge. 2 years after the North Lawndale fire, and the executive order that transformed Chicago's emergency response, Samara Johnson stood on the steps of the newly dedicated Samara Johnson Wellness and Response Hub as a brisk autumn wind carried the cheers of community members. Beneath her, the polished stone bore an inscription in elegant script. In honor of one nurse's courage, may this hub stand as a beacon of hope and readiness for all. Around her, neighborhood residents, young and old, black, white, and every hue in between, lined the plaza, holding handmade banners that read, "Badge or no badge, she saves lives," and "From injustice to justice." Local brass musicians struck up a spirited fanfare, their trumpets and trombones echoing off the brick facades of the remodeled community center. Mayor Lopez and the fire commissioner flanked Samara as she raised oversized ceremonial scissors to cut a sky blue ribbon stretched across the hub's wide double doors. Flashbulbs popped as she pressed the blades through the fabric, and the crowd surged forward in applause. Inside, the hub's open-plan layout revealed a gleaming triage bay, rows of medical backpacks ready for deployment, and a classroom where CPR mannequins stood at attention. Throughout the day's dedication ceremony, Samara toured each corner of the facility. In the training room, she observed a group of veteran nurses, once skeptics of the emergency response expansion, now guiding cadets through simulated car crash scenarios with confidence. In the community outreach office, volunteers phoned neighbors to schedule flu shot clinics and home safety workshops. A young mother approached Samara, tears in her eyes, clutching a photo of the very toddler Samara had rescued. "Because of you, my son grew up," she whispered. Outside, children darted around a safety obstacle course set up on the plaza. Miniature fire hydrants, traffic cones, and mock stretchers letting them role-play first responder drills. A group of high schoolers unveiled a mural on the hub's east wall depicting Samara's silhouette carrying the elderly man down the ladder. Vibrant lines of orange and blue capturing the urgency of that dawn rescue. Beneath it, the mural's title read, "Service Unbounded." As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the hub's facade, Samara joined a panel discussion on the hub's rooftop terrace. Seated with city officials and community leaders, she shared reflections. "When I was first denied that EMT badge, I saw it as a barrier between me and the people I was born to serve. But it became a catalyst for change. Today, every qualified nurse in Chicago can step onto an ambulance with the same authority I have, because we proved that competence, not bureaucracy, must guide who we entrust with saving lives." Below, the streets pulsed with gratitude. Neighbours mingled with paramedics. Families signed up for next week's community-led safety patrols. And the hub's front desk fielded inquiries from other cities eager to replicate the model. Samara smiled as she watched the transformation. What began as one act of uncredentialed heroism had blossomed into a network of prepared citizens and professionals, united by the belief that care should never be withheld by paperwork. When the festivities wound down, Samara stepped out onto a balcony overlooking the plaza, the Chicago skyline glittering against the dusk sky. She removed her EMT badge from her scrub pocket and held it up to the fading light, its polished surface reflecting the first stars of evening. In that moment, she knew her journey had come full circle, from denial at a licensing desk to being the namesake of a center that ensured no capable hand would ever again be turned away. As the wind whispered through the city streets, Samara felt a quiet certainty settle in her heart. In Chicago, compassion would always carry the rightful badge of honor.